In the shadow of Deadwater Mill, where industrial fog mingles with Maine forest mist, some secrets are dangerous enough to kill. At 11:47 p.m. on October 14, 2023, the contamination alarm at Deadwater Mill cut through the Maine night like a blade. The piercing electronic shriek echoed across the Penobscot River valley, bouncing off granite ridges and through stands of white pine that had witnessed a century of industrial operations. The mill never slept. Steam rose continuously from its massive stacks, and the rhythmic pounding of pulp hammers provided a constant heartbeat to Deadwater Township. But the night shift operated in a different world. A skeleton crew of 12 workers managing the sprawling facility while the day shift slept in company, housing scattered through the forest. Sandra Kowalski had worked these graveyard hours for 15 years. At 53, she was the senior quality control inspector, trusted with monitoring the chemical processes that turned Maine timber into paper. Her colleagues knew her as meticulous, methodical, someone who documented everything in precise handwriting that filled report after report. That night, Sandra was making her routine rounds when the alarm triggered. The contamination protocols were clear: seal the affected area, evacuate non-essential personnel, and wait for day shift supervisors. But according to the mill's computerized log system, Sandra's keycard accessed the chemical storage facility at 11:52 p.m., 5 minutes after the alarm sounded. Security radio transcripts show Sandra's voice at 11:54 p.m. "Control, this is Inspector Kowalski. I'm showing elevated readings in Storage Bay 7. The mixture ratios are completely off spec." Her voice was calm, professional, carrying the authority of someone who had seen every kind of equipment malfunction the old mill could produce. That was the last time anyone heard from Sandra Kowalski. The chemical storage facility sat apart from the main mill buildings, connected by a covered walkway that spanned a ravine filled with decades of wood chips and industrial runoff. On clear nights, workers could see the lights of Bangor 30 miles south, but fog often rolled up from the Penobscot, turning the facility into an island of industrial light floating in gray nothingness. Sandra's inspection station was found exactly as she had left it: clipboard with half-completed quality reports, coffee still warm, and a thermos marked with her initials. Safety equipment neatly arranged on the metal desk. But Sandra herself had vanished into the maze of chemical tanks, processing pipes, and monitoring equipment that formed the heart of the mill's operations. By morning, the contamination alarm had been silenced. The chemical readings returned to normal, and the day shift arrived to find Sandra's abandoned post. But the questions that began that October night would spread through Deadwater Township like the paper mill's acrid smoke, settling into every corner of the small community and refusing to dissipate. Day shift supervisor Randy Mashaw, no relation to union steward Tom Mashaw, discovered Sandra's empty station at 6:15 a.m. on October 15. The first thing he noticed was the silence. No radio chatter from the quality control post, no response to his morning check-in calls. When he reached the inspection station, Sandra's equipment told a story that made no sense. Her safety helmet sat on the desk beside an untouched sandwich. Her high-visibility vest hung on its designated hook. Most troubling, her emergency radio. The device every night shift worker was required to carry lay next to her clipboard, its battery indicator showing a full charge. She would never leave her post without that radio, Randy later told Penobscot County investigators. Sandra was old school. She followed every protocol, every time. Finding that radio sitting there was like finding her arm cut off. Within 2 hours of the discovery, Deadwater Mill's corporate offices in Augusta had dispatched a legal team to the facility. Mill manager Catherine Reynolds held a brief meeting with the Skeleton Day crew, emphasizing that all media inquiries should be directed to corporate communications. No one was to discuss Sandra's disappearance with outsiders. Not family, not friends, not local law enforcement beyond the basic facts. But the facts themselves painted a puzzling picture. Sandra's keycard showed 5 separate access attempts to the restricted chemical storage areas between 11:52 p.m. and 12:23 a.m. The final swipe occurred at Storage Unit D7, a high-security area containing the mill's most dangerous chemicals: chlorine dioxide, hydrogen sulfide, and industrial solvents that required specialized handling procedures. Security footage proved equally mystifying. The mill's aging camera system, installed in the 1990s, suffered from numerous blind spots and technical failures. The cameras covering the chemical storage walkway showed normal operations until 11:51 p.m., then displayed only static until 1:17 a.m. down. Mill maintenance logs indicated no scheduled repairs or known malfunctions. Sandra's 2018 Subaru Forester remained in the employee parking lot, keys in her purse, personal belongings undisturbed. Her lunch bag contained a half-eaten apple and a note reminding herself to call EP Hotline Monday. The note was written on mill stationery in Sandra's distinctive handwriting. By noon on October 15th, Penobscot County Sheriff's deputies arrived to conduct preliminary interviews. They found a workplace culture built on loyalty and silence. Workers who had known Sandra for over a decade suddenly became vague about her recent behavior, her concerns, her state of mind during those final weeks. "The company takes care of its people," mill electrician Joe Thibodeau told investigators. Sandra knew that. We all know that. She wouldn't just walk away from her job, her benefits, her pension. Something happened to her, but it wasn't voluntary. Yet mill management presented a different narrative. In official statements, they described Sandra as a valued employee who had been under increasing personal stress. They noted her recent requests for overtime, her tendency to work late reviewing reports, her growing isolation from coworkers. The company's position was clear. Sandra Kowalski had suffered some kind of personal crisis and left the facility voluntarily. The Penobscot County Sheriff's Office opened a missing person investigation, but their resources were limited. The mill's corporate legal team provided selective cooperation, offering access to some records while claiming others were protected by proprietary business interests. Critical security footage from the chemical storage areas was declared damaged beyond recovery. As investigators expanded their inquiry, they discovered that Sandra's key card had been used to access restricted areas on multiple occasions during the previous month. Each entry occurred during her night shifts, always in areas related to chemical storage and waste processing. When asked about these unusual access patterns, mill management explained that Sandra had been conducting special quality audits at their request. But Sandra's family had never heard of any special audits. Her daughter Michelle, a nurse in Bangor, told investigators that her mother had seemed increasingly anxious in recent weeks, mentioning problems at work that she couldn't discuss. She said there were things happening at the mill that weren't right, Michelle recalled. But when I asked for details, she would just shake her head and say she was still figuring things out. The investigation stalled quickly. Without physical evidence of foul play, without witnesses to Sandra's final hours, without cooperation from mill management, the case became what law enforcement termed a voluntary missing adult situation. But Sandra's family knew better. They knew she would never abandon her responsibilities, never leave without explanation, never disappear into the Maine woods without a trace. Something had happened to Sandra Kowalski during those missing hours between the contamination alarm and dawn. The question was whether anyone with the power to investigate would ever discover what that something was. 3 days after Sandra's disappearance, her daughter Michelle made a discovery that changed everything. While cleaning out her mother's home office in preparation for the investigation, she found a manila folder hidden beneath a stack of gardening magazines. The folder contained 47 pages of photocopied mill documents, handwritten notes, and chemical analysis reports that painted a disturbing picture of conditions at Deadwater Mill. The documents dated back 6 weeks, beginning with Sandra's routine quality control reports from early September. But these weren't the standard forms filed with mill management. These were Sandra's personal copies, annotated in red ink with observations that never made it into the official record. Chlorine levels 23% above EPA standards, reported as within limits. Read one note dated September 12th. Another, from September 28th, was more direct. D7 storage showing consistent contamination. Groundwater samples should be mandatory. Management refuses testing. Michelle contacted the Penobscot County Sheriff's Office immediately. Detective Ray Bashar, the lead investigator on Sandra's case, recognized the significance of the hidden documents. These weren't the actions of someone having a personal crisis, Bouchard later observed. This was systematic documentation by someone who knew they were building a case. The most revealing documents were Sandra's personal logs from the weeks before her disappearance. In her precise handwriting, she detailed conversations with supervisors, noting dates, times, and specific language used when she raised safety concerns. On October 3rd, she wrote, "C. Reynolds told me directly to stop filing supplementary reports. Said my job was quality control, not environmental monitoring. Implied my position could be affected by continued reports. Co-workers, when pressed by investigators, began to reveal Sandra's growing isolation within the mill's social structure. Night shift operator Tommy Levesque admitted that Sandra had approached him in late September, asking detailed questions about waste disposal procedures and chemical storage protocols. She was asking about things that weren't really her department, Levesque told investigators. Stuff about where the waste chemicals went, how often we cleaned the storage tanks, whether anyone ever tested the groundwater around the facility. I told her she was getting into areas that could cause problems for all of us. The hidden documents also revealed Sandra's research into environmental regulations and whistleblower protection laws. She had printed pages from EPA websites about reporting chemical violations, downloaded forms for filing federal environmental complaints, and researched legal protections for employees who report safety violations. On October 8th, just 6 days before her disappearance, Sandra had contacted the EPA's environmental hotline. According to phone records subpoenaed by investigators, the call lasted 17 minutes. EPA officials later confirmed they had received an inquiry about reporting procedures for chemical contamination at industrial facilities, but they could not disclose details due to whistleblower protection protocols. Sandra's final report, dated October 13th, represented the culmination of her concerns. The document detailed what she termed systematic violations of federal environmental regulations, including improper chemical storage, illegal discharge of contaminated water into the Penobscot River system, and falsification of safety reports submitted to state environmental agencies. The report concluded with a stark assessment. Current operations at Deadwater Mill pose significant risks to environmental safety and public health. Chemical contamination of groundwater appears likely. Immediate federal investigation recommended. But Sandra never filed this final report. It was found in her home office, printed and ready for submission, with a sticky note attached reading, EPA submission, Monday a.m. Monday was October 16th, 2 days after she vanished. When confronted with Sandra's documented concerns, mill management maintained their position that she had been under personal stress. Manager Catherine Reynolds issued a statement through corporate attorneys. Ms. Kowalski was a valued employee experiencing personal difficulties that affected her judgment. The allegations in her personal documents are unfounded and reflect her deteriorating mental state in the weeks before her disappearance. However, Sandra's family and friends disputed any suggestion of mental health issues. Her daughter Michelle described a mother who had become more determined and focused in recent weeks, not less stable. She was scared, Michelle told investigators, but she was also angry. She kept saying someone had to speak up about what was happening at the mill. Neighbor Dorothy Gagnon, who lived next door to Sandra for 12 years, recalled late-night conversations in early October. Sandra came over around 11 p.m. one night, which was unusual because she was usually at work then. She said she had taken a sick day because she needed time to think. She was worried about people getting hurt, worried about the river, worried about what would happen to mill families if the truth came out. It made me musty. The paper trail Sandra left behind revealed a woman caught between loyalty to her employer and responsibility to her community. For 15 years, she had been a model employee, following procedures, maintaining quality standards, keeping the mill's operations running smoothly. But in her final weeks, she had discovered something that forced her to choose between keeping her job and protecting public safety. The question investigators faced was whether Sandra had the opportunity to make that choice, or whether someone had made it for her. The documents suggested she was prepared to become a federal whistleblower, armed with evidence that could trigger major environmental investigations. In a community where the mill provided economic survival for hundreds of families, such evidence represented a threat that went far beyond corporate profits. As Detective Bouchard reviewed Sandra's meticulous documentation, one fact became increasingly clear. Sandra Kowalski had been building a case that could have brought down Deadwater Mill. Whether she lived to present that case remained the central mystery of her disappearance. Tom Michaud had represented mill workers as Local 1-234's shop steward for 23 years. He'd seen contract negotiations turn bitter, watched families lose homes during shutdowns, and helped workers navigate corporate restructuring that eliminated hundreds of jobs. But Sandra Kowalski's situation, he told investigators, was unlike anything he'd encountered. Sandra was always management-friendly, Michaud explained during his interview with Detective Bouchard. She believed the company would do right by its employees if you worked hard and followed the rules. She wasn't political, wasn't a troublemaker. That's what made her transformation so dramatic. According to union records, Sandra had rarely attended membership meetings and had never filed grievances against mill management. She paid her dues, participated in required safety training, but maintained what Michaud described as professional distance from union activities. Quality control inspectors occupied an unusual position in the mill hierarchy, technically hourly workers covered by union contracts, but functioning with supervisory authority that aligned them more closely with management. That dynamic changed abruptly in late September 2023. Sandra attended her first union meeting in over 5 years, arriving with a notebook full of questions about worker protection rights, environmental safety reporting, and retaliation policies. She asked specifically about protections for employees who reported safety violations to federal agencies. She wanted to know if the union would support a member who filed EPA complaints, Michaud recalled. I told her that was dangerous territory. The mill employs half this township. You start involving federal regulators, you risk everyone's livelihood. She said she understood, but some risks were bigger than job security. Other workers began noticing changes in Sandra's behavior around the same time. Night shift mechanic Dave Pelletier described Sandra asking unusual questions about chemical waste disposal procedures, equipment maintenance schedules, and safety protocol compliance. She was always thorough, but this was different. She was investigating, not just inspecting. The mill's management structure had evolved over decades to discourage worker complaints about safety or environmental issues. Supervisors received bonuses based on minimal regulatory incidents. Workers who raised concerns often found themselves assigned to less desirable shifts or subjected to increased scrutiny of their performance. The system worked through subtle pressure rather than direct threats. But Sandra's position as quality control inspector gave her access to information that most workers never saw. She reviewed chemical analysis reports, monitored environmental compliance data, and maintained records that revealed patterns invisible to individual workers. When she began asking questions, she was connecting dots that management preferred to keep separate. On October 5th, Sandra requested a formal meeting with Tom Michaud to discuss what she termed serious safety concerns. The meeting took place at Michaud's home, away from mill property and potential surveillance. Sandra brought copies of chemical analysis reports showing consistent violations of EPA standards for water discharge and air emissions. She laid out everything on my kitchen table, Michaud told investigators. Reports going back months showing chemical contamination levels that should have triggered federal notifications. She said management was falsifying the reports they submitted to environmental agencies. She wanted union protection if she went to federal authorities. Michaud faced an impossible choice. Supporting Sandra could result in federal investigations that might shut down the mill, eliminating jobs for over 300 families in a region with few economic alternatives. Refusing to support her meant potentially enabling environmental crimes that could harm those same families' health and safety. I told her the union would support any member following federal law, Michaud said. But I also warned her about the consequences. Mill management doesn't just fire troublemakers. They make sure they can't get work anywhere in the region. They have connections throughout the industry. Sandra's response revealed the depth of her concerns. According to Michaud, she had researched cancer rates in mill worker families and found patterns that suggested long-term chemical exposure. She had documented groundwater contamination in residential wells near the facility. She believed the mill's operations were causing health problems that would eventually become undeniable, making federal investigation inevitable. She said someone had to speak up before people started dying, Michaud recalled. She kept saying, "Tom, we all live here too. Our families drink this water, breathe this air. How can we stay silent?" The union's official response was cautious. Michaud advised Sandra to document everything, follow proper internal reporting procedures, and avoid direct contact with federal agencies until those procedures were exhausted. He promised union legal support if management retaliated against her for following safety protocols. But privately, Michaud began hearing rumors that concerned him. Mill supervisors were discussing Sandra's attitude problem and her unrealistic expectations about environmental compliance. Her immediate supervisor had contacted corporate human resources about performance issues with the quality control department. On October 12th, 2 days before Sandra's disappearance, she attended her final union meeting. She told Tom Michaud that she had made her decision. She would file federal environmental complaints the following week, regardless of consequences. She asked only that the union represent her fairly if mill management attempted retaliation. She looked scared but determined, Michaud remembered. She said she'd rather lose her job than live with knowing she could have prevented harm to her community. That was the last conversation I had with Sandra Kowalski. The union's position after Sandra's disappearance reflected the complex loyalties that divided Deadwater Township. But officially, they supported the investigation and called for Sandra's safe return. Privately, some members worried that her environmental activism could destroy the economic foundation of their community, while others believed her disappearance proved that challenging mill management carried deadly consequences. As the investigation continued, Tom Michaud found himself caught between competing obligations: to protect his members' jobs and to honor Sandra's courage in speaking truth to power. The questions that haunted him were the same ones facing the entire community. How far would the mill go to protect its operations? And what had happened to the woman brave enough to challenge them? To understand what Sandra Kowalski might have discovered in those final weeks, investigators turned to environmental toxicologist Dr. Sarah Blackbird at the University of Maine. Dr. Blackbird had spent 15 years studying industrial contamination in paper mills across northern New England. When she reviewed the chemical readings from Sandra's hidden files, her assessment was immediate and troubling. "These numbers represent a serious environmental hazard," Dr. Blackbird stated in her official consultation with the Penobscot County Sheriff's Office. "The combination of chlorine compounds, heavy metals, and organic solvents at these concentrations would pose significant health risks to both workers and the surrounding community." The chemicals Sandra had been monitoring included mercury, lead, and a cocktail of chlorinated organic compounds used in the paper bleaching process. According to Dr. Blackbird's analysis, several readings exceeded federal safety standards by factors of 3 to 5 times the allowable limits. But the environmental concerns extended far beyond the mill's boundaries. Community health worker Margaret Thibodeau had been quietly documenting illness patterns in Deadwater Township for over a decade. Her informal survey revealed troubling statistics. Cancer rates among mill workers' families were nearly double the state average, with particular concentrations of liver, kidney, and blood cancers. "People here don't like to talk about it," Thibodeau explained during a lengthy interview at her home on Township Road 14. "The mill provides jobs for 3 generations of families. You don't bite the hand that feeds you, even if it might be poisoning you." Thibodeau's data, compiled in handwritten notebooks and stored in her basement, showed that children living within 5 miles of the mill had elevated rates of asthma and developmental delays. Groundwater wells in the area contained trace amounts of industrial chemicals, though not yet at levels requiring federal intervention. The investigation into Sandra's home computer revealed another dimension to her growing concerns. Browser history showed extensive research into successful lawsuits against paper mills in other states. She had downloaded court documents from cases in Alabama, Georgia, and Washington, all involving environmental contamination and corporate cover-ups. Of particular interest were her bookmarks related to whistleblower protection laws. Sandra had visited the Environmental Protection Agency's Whistleblower website multiple times in the weeks before her disappearance. She had downloaded forms for reporting environmental violations and read extensively about federal protection programs for employees who expose corporate wrongdoing. Phone records obtained through a court order showed that Sandra had called the EPA's Environmental Crimes Division on October 8, 6 days before she vanished. The call lasted 18 minutes. According to EPA spokesperson Jennifer Walsh, the agency could not comment on potential ongoing investigations, but confirmed that they had received preliminary inquiries regarding environmental compliance issues at industrial facilities in northern Maine. The timing was significant. Sandra's final chemical readings, the ones that showed the most severe contamination levels, were recorded on October 12th. Her disappearance occurred during the night shift of October 14th. In the space of 6 days, she had contacted federal authorities, documented the most serious environmental violations of her career, and vanished without a trace. Dr. Blackbird reviewed the timeline and offered a sobering assessment. If these readings are accurate, and if this contamination was ongoing, then Sandra Kowalski had documented evidence of serious federal environmental crimes. Someone in her position, with her experience and documentation, could have triggered a major federal investigation. What I'd see. The implications were staggering. A federal environmental crimes investigation could result in millions of dollars in fines, criminal charges against mill executives, and potentially the closure of Deadwater's primary employer. For a company already struggling with declining profits and international competition, such an investigation could prove fatal. Community members who spoke with investigators painted a picture of a town caught between economic survival and environmental health. Retired mill worker Frank Cormier, whose family had worked at Deadwater for 4 generations, expressed the dilemma facing many residents. "We know the mill ain't perfect," Cormier admitted during an interview at the township's general store. "But it's what we got. You shut down that mill, this whole town dies. Maybe Sandra found something bad. But what good does it do if telling the truth kills the community?" Others disagreed. Environmental activist and Penobscot Nation member Joseph Neptune had been monitoring water quality in the Penobscot River system for over 20 years. His independent testing confirmed many of Sandra's findings. "The river is sick," Neptune told investigators. "The fish populations are declining, the water quality is deteriorating, and people are getting cancer at rates that should terrify everyone. Sandra Kowalski was trying to save this community, not destroy it." Dr. Blackbird's analysis revealed that Sandra's documentation methods were sophisticated and scientifically sound. Her sampling techniques, data recording, and quality control measures met professional standards that would be admissible in federal court proceedings. This wasn't amateur activism, Dr. Blackbird observed. Sandra knew exactly what she was doing. Her evidence would have been compelling to federal investigators and potentially devastating to mill operations. As winter settled over Penobscot County, the environmental questions raised by Sandra's research remained unanswered. The mill continued its operations under routine state oversight, but federal investigators had not yet arrived in Deadwater Township. Whether Sandra's evidence would ever reach the right authorities now depended on finding Sandra herself. Dr. Blackbird's final observation haunted everyone involved in the case. Environmental whistleblowers face unique pressures. They're not just challenging their employers, they're threatening entire communities' economic survival. That kind of pressure has driven people to desperate measures before. And The question that lingered was whether Sandra had become a victim of those desperate measures, or whether she had found another way to escape the impossible position her discoveries had created. Either way, her meticulous documentation had exposed environmental crimes that continued to threaten the health and safety of everyone living in the shadow of Deadwater Mill. The security footage from the night of Sandra Kowalski's disappearance told a story full of convenient gaps and technical malfunctions. Mill Security Chief Randy Pelletier initially claimed that all surveillance systems had been operating normally on October 14th. However, when investigators finally obtained access to the recordings through a court order, a different picture emerged. Between 11:30 p.m. and 12:45 a.m., the critical window when Sandra had last been heard from, 4 separate cameras experienced simultaneous technical difficulties. These cameras covered the main entrance to the chemical storage facility, the employee parking area, and 2 key interior corridors that Sandra would have used during her inspection rounds. In 32 years of law enforcement, I've never seen this many cameras fail at once by coincidence, observed Detective Ray Bouchard of the Penobscot County Sheriff's Office. The odds of 4 separate systems malfunctioning during the exact time frame we need to review are astronomical. The working cameras revealed other troubling details. At 11:52 p.m., just 2 minutes before Sandra's final radio check-in, 2 vehicles were captured entering the mill complex through the administrative entrance, a gate normally locked after 6 p.m. The vehicles appeared to be dark-colored SUVs with tinted windows, but the image quality was too poor to identify license plates or occupants. Most disturbing was what happened next. At 12:18 a.m., the same 2 vehicles were recorded leaving through the same administrative entrance. Between their arrival and departure, Sandra Kowalski had effectively vanished from the mill premises. Night shift workers who were present during Sandra's disappearance provided conflicting accounts when interviewed by investigators. Some claimed to have seen nothing unusual, while others described a climate of fear and intimidation that discouraged questions about management activities. Forklift operator Danny Coate, who had worked the night shift for 12 years, eventually opened up to investigators after initial reluctance. "You've got to understand," Coate explained during a private interview at his home. "Asking questions around that place could cost you your job. And in a town like Deadwater, losing your mill job means losing everything." According to Coate, management vehicles had been appearing in employee areas during night shifts for several weeks before Sandra's disappearance. Guys in suits, showing up at 1 a.m., 2 a.m., talking to supervisors in hushed tones. "That's not normal mill business," Coate recalled. "We all knew something was going on, but nobody wanted to be the one asking questions." The investigation revealed that Sandra's immediate supervisor, shift foreman Carl Dubois, had been in regular contact with the mill's corporate legal team throughout October. Phone records showed 17 calls between Dubois and Portland-based attorneys in the 3 weeks preceding Sandra's disappearance. When questioned about these calls, Dubois initially claimed that they were routine discussions about worker safety protocols. However, when pressed for specifics, he invoked legal privilege and refused to provide details. The mill's legal team sent a formal letter to the sheriff's office warning against harassment of employees engaged in privileged communications. Perhaps most revealing was information that came from an unexpected source. An anonymous mill employee contacted investigative reporter Janet Mills of the Bangor Daily News in November 2023, 1 month after Sandra's disappearance. The caller, whose identity was never revealed, provided crucial information about Sandra's final night. According to this source, Sandra had arranged to meet someone outside the mill premises after her shift ended at 6 a.m. on October 15th. The meeting was supposedly related to her environmental documentation, and the person she planned to meet was described as someone who could help her take this to the next level. The anonymous caller also revealed that Sandra had been keeping copies of all her contamination reports in a safety deposit box at First National Bank in nearby Lincoln, Maine. When investigators obtained a warrant to examine the box, they found it empty. Bank records showed that someone had accessed the box using Sandra's key and identification on October 16th, 2 days after she had disappeared. Bank security footage from that date showed a woman matching Sandra's general description and height accessing the safety deposit box area, but the quality was too poor to make a positive identification. The timing seemed impossible. How could Sandra access her own safety deposit box 2 days after she had vanished? Detective Bouchard found this development particularly troubling. Either Sandra Kowalski accessed that box herself, which would mean she disappeared voluntarily, and is still alive somewhere, or someone else gained access using her identification. Both possibilities raise serious questions about what really happened that night. Testify. As the investigation continued through the winter of 2023 to 24, the web of corporate secrecy and potential witness intimidation only grew more complex. Mill management hired additional private security, and several employees reported being followed by unfamiliar vehicles after speaking with investigators. Maintenance worker Steve Thibodeau described being approached by men in dark suits who identified themselves as corporate security consultants. They advised him that discussing mill operations with outside investigators could jeopardize his employment and pension benefits. "They never threatened me directly," Thibodeau told Detective Bouchard. "But the message was clear. Keep your mouth shut about anything you might have seen or heard. They knew details about my family, my mortgage, my kids' college plans. That kind of knowledge isn't accidental. And they know the doors are so awry." The investigation also uncovered financial irregularities in mill operations during the weeks surrounding Sandra's disappearance. Corporate accounting records, obtained through subpoena, showed unusual consulting fees paid to several Portland-based security firms. The payments totaled over $200,000 and were classified as crisis management services. When contacted by investigators, these security firms refused to discuss their work for Deadwater Mill, citing client confidentiality agreements. However, public records showed that several of the firms specialized in corporate reputation management and employee relations consulting, euphemisms often used to describe witness intimidation and the question that haunted everyone involved was becoming increasingly clear. Had Sandra Kowalski stumbled onto something so damaging that powerful interests were willing to make her disappear permanently? And if so, was she still alive somewhere? Or had she become a casualty of corporate environmental crimes? As snow blanketed the Penobscot River Valley, the search for answers continued. But the mill's culture of silence seemed impenetrable. The conspiracy of silence that surrounded Sandra's disappearance appeared to reach far beyond the mill itself, extending into corporate boardrooms and legal offices where the real decisions about her fate may have been made. More than 1 year after Sandra Kowalski vanished during her graveyard shift at the Deadwater Mill, the case remains one of northern Maine's most perplexing mysteries. Despite extensive investigations by local, state, and federal authorities, no definitive answers have emerged about what happened during those crucial hours on October 14, 2023. Penobscot County Sheriff Michael Roy acknowledged in a recent statement that the case remains an active investigation, though resources have been limited by budget constraints and competing priorities. "We've followed every credible lead," Sheriff Roy explained. "We've interviewed dozens of witnesses, analyzed hundreds of hours of surveillance footage, and worked with federal agencies on environmental aspects of the case. But without physical evidence or credible witness testimony about Sandra's final hours, our hands are tied." The mill itself continues to operate under increased environmental monitoring imposed by the state of Maine following Sandra's disappearance. The Department of Environmental Protection conducts monthly inspections, and water quality testing in the Penobscot River system has been expanded. However, no criminal charges have been filed in connection with either Sandra's disappearance or the environmental violations she documented. Mill spokesman David Rancourt maintained the company's position that Sandra's disappearance was a personal matter unrelated to mill operations. "Sandra Kowalski was a valued employee who took pride in her work," Rancourt stated in a written response to questions. "We continue to cooperate fully with law enforcement and hope for her safe return to her family." Sandra's daughter, Michelle Kowalski, has spent the years since her mother's disappearance advocating for environmental accountability and investigating corporate influence in rural Maine communities. She has organized memorial walks through Deadwater Township and established a scholarship fund for environmental science students at the University of Maine. "My mother believed in doing the right thing, even when it was difficult," Michelle explained during an interview at her home in Bangor. "She discovered something that threatened powerful interests, and I believe that's why she's not here today. Until we have answers, I'll keep fighting for the truth she was willing to risk everything for." Michelle's own investigation has uncovered additional pieces of the puzzle that law enforcement either missed or couldn't pursue. Through Freedom of Information Act requests, she obtained EPA correspondence showing that the agency had opened a preliminary investigation into the Deadwater Mill based on Sandra's October 8 phone call. However, that investigation was suspended indefinitely after Sandra's disappearance eliminated the primary source of information. Environmental testing conducted by independent researchers in 2024 has confirmed many of Sandra's original findings. Groundwater monitoring wells installed by the state show ongoing contamination in areas downstream from the mill. Several private wells have been forced to close due to chemical contamination, though mill management disputes any connection to their operations. The broader community of Deadwater Township remains divided about Sandra's disappearance and its implications. Some residents believe she uncovered a corporate conspiracy that reaches into the highest levels of state government and industry. Others maintain that she simply chose to disappear, overwhelmed by work stress and family pressures. Retired mill worker Eleanor Thibodeau, who knew Sandra for 15 years, offered a perspective shared by many longtime residents. Sandra wasn't the type to just walk away from her responsibilities. She had a daughter, a mortgage, a whole life here. If she's gone, it's because someone made her gone. Oh, so don't say bye. The theories about Sandra's fate range from plausible to speculative. Some investigators believe she was murdered by corporate interests and her body disposed of in the vast wilderness areas surrounding Deadwater Township. Others suggest she may have entered witness protection after providing evidence to federal authorities, though no agency has confirmed such an arrangement. A third theory, supported by the mysterious safety deposit box asked 2 days after her disappearance, suggests Sandra may have staged her own disappearance to escape mounting pressure from both corporate interests and federal investigators. This theory gained credibility when bank analysis revealed that the person accessing the box knew Sandra's personal identification numbers and security questions. Detective Ray Bouchard, who has worked the case since its inception, remains convinced that Sandra's environmental research holds the key to understanding her disappearance. Environmental crimes often involve significant money and powerful people, Bouchard observed. When you threaten someone's ability to generate millions of dollars in profit, they sometimes respond with extreme measures. The environmental legacy of Sandra's work continues to unfold across northern Maine. Her documentation has been cited in several ongoing lawsuits against paper mills throughout the region. The EPA has used her research methods as a model for training other environmental compliance inspectors. Dr. Sarah Blackbird, the environmental toxicologist who analyzed Sandra's findings, believes the case represents a turning point in corporate environmental accountability. Sandra Kowalski demonstrated that individual employees with courage and documentation skills can expose environmental crimes that threaten entire communities. Her disappearance shows both the power of that truth and the dangers faced by those who dare to speak it. Recent developments have added new dimensions to the mystery. In September 2024, the EPA announced a comprehensive investigation into industrial contamination throughout the Penobscot River watershed. While officials declined to connect this investigation directly to Sandra's case, the timing and scope suggest her documentation may have finally reached federal authorities. Additionally, several former Deadwater Mill employees have come forward with information about corporate intimidation tactics and environmental cover-ups. These witnesses, speaking through attorneys, describe a pattern of systematic evidence destruction and employee coercion that extends back over a decade. As autumn returns to the Penobscot River Valley, The questions surrounding Sandra's disappearance remain as persistent as the morning mist rising from the contaminated waters. Did a dedicated quality control inspector discover evidence so damaging that powerful interests silenced her permanently? Is she still alive somewhere, protected by federal authorities or hiding in fear? Or does the truth lie somewhere else entirely, in the complex intersection of environmental crime, corporate power, and individual conscience that defines modern industrial America? Until Sandra Kowalski returns or her fate is definitively determined, the mill town of Deadwater Township will continue to live with the haunting question. What really happened during the midnight shift on October 14, 2023? And perhaps more importantly, what does her disappearance tell us about the price of speaking truth to power in communities where economic survival and environmental safety collide? The mystery of Sandra Kowalski endures, a reminder that some secrets are worth killing for, and some truths are dangerous enough to make people vanish into the Maine wilderness without a trace.